I also want to ask you what changes you've seen over the years, because you've been doing this a long time. So changes that you've seen over the years that you might want to talk about, and also changes maybe that you've seen since the pandemic that maybe have been different than what you thought you might have expected.
Yeah, probably the biggest thing is, I have a piece of equipment here called the Zoom PodTrack P4. And this goes for like $200. For those of us that remember them, it's about the size of a checkbook. It's really tiny. And I have something similar to this in my closet that I paid $800 for. And so things have gotten really cheap, and things are now designed for podcasters, where before it was like, oh, you can take this musical mixer and kind of tweak it a bit and use it for that. So that's probably one of the things that, just the technology and all the resources available now. There's, back then there was Libsyn, now there's Libsyn and Captivate and Blueberry and all these other different media hosts. And if you, probably by the time we're done with this interview, there will be yet another piece of AI where you just upload your audio and it will, it'll make a newsletter for you. It'll transcribe it. It'll do your laundry. It slices, it dices, it juliennes. There's just another one of those out there. And since the pandemic, it's interesting because right now, the number of people, because everybody made a podcast in the pandemic. I'm bored. If I have to, teach my third grader math again, I'm going to lose my brain. And so people started a podcast. Again, it's the best $7 therapy, money can buy. But since then, people are still making podcasts, but not as on what would it be? Not at the rate they were during the pandemic. But the number of listeners is still going up. So what happens now is we have less people making new content, but more listeners. And I'm like, this is like the best time to start a podcast because the audience, the listening audience is going up, but the number of people making podcasts is actually kind of flat right now and maybe even dipping just a little bit.
And so, yeah, people are finding out more about podcasts in general. I mean, it's much more of a going concern at the moment. It's even in popular media. So, Only Murders in the Building I'm thinking of, and, like other shows that mention podcasting specifically, you actually find advertising out there in the real world for advertising for podcasts. It's really interesting, and a lot of big names getting into it.
But that's the other fun thing is even the big names, like everybody thinks if I just talk into a microphone, money will fall from heaven. And I talked with Rob Greenlee, who's a friend of mine, and he worked at Podcast One for a number of years. Mm-hmm. And they had a number of celebrity people that just started a podcast. And they thought, well, like one was Kathy Lee Gifford. And she was like, I'll just talk in. I'm Kathy. Don't you know me? I'm Kathy Lee Gifford. And I remember Amy Schumer's podcast. Now I realize why Amy's wasn't that good because she was like 8 months pregnant at the time. So she gets a pass. But I've seen now there was a documentary on her. She was recording it literally in like a back porch that was nothing but glass. And I was like, well, that explains why the audio was horrible.
Oh, wow.
And she had just had a horrible pregnancy. And I was like, well, but again, just being famous, you still have to be good. And I think one of my favorites was Andrew Dice Clay, the comedian, because he must have gotten tips or thought he was doing the radio. And he would 12 minutes into his podcast, he would do like a callback on the radio. It was like, you're listening to the Dice Man. And I'm like, did you think I jumped in at the 11-minute mark? Like, why? It was the weirdest thing ever. But no. I guess on the other hand, if somebody had, was listening to me on the way to the store and they're listening to Andrew and they get out when he resets at the 12-minute mark, maybe that would be handy. But it was just, I was like, why is he doing a reset? It's not radio. So
part of his personality. I don't know.
You still have to be good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.